CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business Europe, live from CGTN in London. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. China and Central and Eastern European countries map out their economic relationship in a post-pandemic world.
Our other headlines: the World Health Organization dismisses the possibility that COVID-19 originated in a laboratory, saying animals are the likely source.
Huge fines and the threat of jail. The UK announces tougher border measures to curb the spread of new COVID variants.
Bitcoin powers towards $50,000, boosted by Tesla's investment in the cryptocurrency. And
the United Arab Emirates' first mission to Mars is set to reach the Red Planet after a 7-month journey.
China's President Xi Jinping has hosted leaders from 17 Central and European countries for an online summit. This is the first time leaders from China and the CEEC countries have gathered together after last year's summit was cancelled due to the pandemic. Sun Lan has the story.
Cooperation, connectivity, and concrete results. These are the main takeaway from Chinese President Xi Jinping's speech during the summit. He stressed the group's founding guidelines that all countries, big or small, are equal partners, and that 17 plus 1 can mean more than 18. Relations between China and its 17 partners in Central and Eastern Europe have grown in leaps and bounds since the partnership started. Today, trade between China and the CEE countries is nearly 85% bigger than 9 years ago. China's imports from the 17 countries are growing 22% faster than its imports from the group. President Xi said there are even more opportunities as China pledges to import more than $170 billion goods from the CEE countries in the coming 5 years. But Xi warns that the current pandemic is the most pressing task. He said countries must take the pandemic head-on. He pledged China will continue to provide vaccine to countries in need to its best capability and stands ready for vaccine cooperation with CEE countries. Xi also proposed stepping up cooperation in infrastructure, digital economy, e-commerce, health, and clean energy. Leaders of the 17 countries said they had seen growth in infrastructure projects thanks to cooperation with China in the Belt and Road Initiative, and they expected to work more closely with China in fighting the pandemic. Sun Lan, CGTN.
A major focus of the summit will be the pandemic. Medical equipment is being sent from China to Europe by train. The railways are also a key focus for Beijing as it works to boost trade. CGTN's Zhou Jiaxin reports.
Where I'm standing in central China's Wuhan, more than 6,400 tons of supplies to fight COVID-19 have been carried to countries in Central and Eastern Europe by freight train. That's since the city opened up again in late March last year.
Last May, 50 containers with 3,500 tons of anti-COVID-19 supplies were carried on a special train from China to Belgrade, Serbia. That was one of the first relief efforts Wuhan provided to Central and Eastern Europe.
Wuhan's freight services have helped transport considerable amounts of electronics and machinery to countries as far and wide as Poland, the Czech Republic, and Serbia. It's all part of a railway network of 30 different routes across China, transporting goods to and from Europe.
We've been dedicated to importing food from the region, such as dairy products from Belarus and Poland. Last year, we reached a purchasing deal worth $15 million with a Polish dairy producer at the China International Import Expo. More quality imports are expected for the Chinese market.
Early this month, the Chinese Commerce Ministry said its foreign trade with 17 countries in Central and Eastern Europe surpassed $100 billion in 2020. This rate of growth is higher than the average between China and the rest of Europe. Officials say the rail network is key to unlocking hidden potential, as trade investment between the partners shows no sign of slowing. Zhou Jiaxing, CGTN, Wuhan.
The British government says it wants an agreement to resolve post-Brexit trade issues with Northern Ireland as quickly as possible. A spokesperson for Prime Minister Boris Johnson says he'll work constructively with the European Union after complaints of a shortage of some goods since Britain completed its exit from the EU on the 31st of December. Well, our correspondent Tony Waterman has been watching the story in Brussels. Tony, any reaction from the EU on the signals coming out of number 10 Downing Street?
Well, Jamie, Brussels has made it very clear that it has no intentions of renegotiating or significantly changing any parts of the Brexit agreement, including the Northern Ireland Protocol. And the feeling here is that the UK is really trying to capitalize on what was a rather large blunder on the part of the European Commission when last month they threatened to trigger Article 16 of the withdrawal agreement, effectively overriding parts of it so that it could extend new export controls on vaccines to Northern Ireland. They're trying to use that blunder as leverage to fix a completely different problem. That problem being goods, particularly food, are now getting caught in this tangled web of customs checks and safety checks and paperwork at the border as they try to travel between the UK and Northern Ireland. And Brussels believes that the UK could solve those problems if it fully implemented the trade deal, which was clinched just at the end of last year to fix these shortfalls in supplies, which, by the way, is not an issue that is only unique to Belfast. This is these Brexit shortfalls in products are cropping up in some pretty unusual places here in Europe as well.
Tucked away in the Belgian countryside is Stone Manor, a go-to market for UK expats craving a little taste of home. Tea, jams, baked beans, they can all be found here, or at least they used to be.
This rack would have been bare for about 3 weeks now.
Manager Ryan Pierce, whose grandparents founded the store, says 90% of the shelves are now empty. Deliveries a victim of post-Brexit red tape. Stockpiles are so depleted, the shop was forced to temporarily close, a first in its 40-year history.
We've never experienced anything like this. We're having to get 250 lots of paperwork, for example. And if one of them is wrong, it could jeopardize the whole consignment.
The Road Haulage Association says there was a 68% drop in exports from Britain to the EU in January, as businesses adjust to new checks at the border. The UK government has disputed the figure, but Pierce has been left scrambling to find new suppliers within the EU customs union. This truck just arrived from Ireland with fresh meat. Stone Manor, one stop along an expanding route that skirts the UK.
The run is getting busier every week, whereas last year maybe you'd have 7 or 8 deliveries. Now we're up on 14, you know, so busier for me.
2 weeks into February, and these sausages and bacon are the first products that the store has received so far this year. They come from a butcher in Ireland, bypassing the UK completely.
But what's saved in paperwork is lost in price. Pierce says this small shipment was 3 times more expensive and has to be split between 2 locations. The shelves at Stonemore's Brussels shop are just as bare. The customers who do stop in struggle to fill their carts.
Normally I would buy more tea, and my girls like maize and bagels.
Pierce doesn't know when the stores will be restocked. He blames the UK government for leaving businesses on both sides of the channel underprepared.
If they are given the correct information, then why are so many businesses struggling?
For now, sausage and bacon offer a brief reprieve and a reminder of the way things used to be.
Tony, what are the expectations that a resolution can be reached in these talks after a couple of weeks of pretty strained exchanges?
Well, it's really unclear what's going to take place in this meeting between Michael Gove and Maro Sefcovic, the two gentlemen that are in charge of properly implementing the withdrawal agreement when they do meet later this week. The UK rather, is essentially asking for an extension to the grace period when it comes to certain chilled products which are being traded. They want that extended perhaps up to 2 years until January of 2023. And some of those grace periods are due to expire at the end of this month. The EU has said that it will not go for a 2-year extension, although some members, including Ireland, have hinted that they would be open to some sort of moderate extension to help ease some of this pain. But you're right, both sides have been experiencing very high levels of tension over the past 5 years since the Brexit vote first took place. So maybe smoothing things over in this meeting or trying to find some resolution is something that could benefit both sides.
Tony Waterman in Brussels, thank you very much.
Oil prices have hit a 13-month high, driven by optimism over recovering fuel demand. It marks the 7th straight session of gains for both benchmark contracts. Brent crude futures rose to $61 a barrel on Tuesday morning, while West Texas Intermediate hit $58. Some analysts have warned that a weak US dollar is behind the surge and say they expect prices to correct. Total has posted higher than expected earnings for the fourth quarter as the oil market steadied itself late last year. The boost helped the French firm offset a dismal 2020 with an assets write-down driving a $7.2 billion loss for the year caused by the pandemic. Despite the recent pickup, Total says it will still target another $500 million of cost cuts in 2021. The CEO of Huawei says he hopes the new US President Joe Biden will be open-minded with the Chinese company. The tech firm was placed on a blacklist by President Trump, who said Huawei was a risk to national security. Analysts have said Huawei can survive the sanctions from Washington, but it will have to change its supply chain. The online grocery company Ocado has reported soaring sales as its CEO says the food retail sector is changing for good. The company's retail sales jumped 35% to more than $3 billion in 2020. COVID-19 has seen demand for online grocery shopping rise, and analysts don't expect the trends to reverse after the pandemic.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, the holiday giant TUI is banking on a summer bounce back as vaccination programs get liftoff.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to The Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Covering the world from 4 continents. A new horizon. Teams in Beijing, Washington, D.C., Nairobi, and London. Who connect, interact, and inquire to bring you the stories that matter to all. The Link, only on CGTN.
Don't forget you can sign up to our daily newsletter. We bring you all the top business headlines straight to your inbox. So sign up for free at this address. CGTN. See the difference.
Mari, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. A joint research mission between the World Health Organization and Chinese experts says it's extremely unlikely COVID-19 leaked from a laboratory.
The findings suggest that the laboratory incident hypothesis is extremely unlikely and to explain the introduction of the virus into the human population, and therefore is not a hypothesis that will implies to suggest future studies into our work to support our future work into the understanding of the origin of the virus.
The joint mission also said there was no indication that the coronavirus was spreading in Wuhan before December 2019, and the virus's animal source hasn't been identified yet. The team has looked into ways of the virus transmitting from natural hosts to humans. They've studied 4 possibilities, including direct transmission, as well as transmission through cold chains, intermediate hosts, or a laboratory. The team believes that it's extremely unlikely that the virus was transmitted through a laboratory. Arriving in mid-January, the team has visited key locations in Wuhan where the first cases were reported and spoken to patients, first responders and Chinese scientists.
Travellers could be fined more than $13,000 and go to jail for up to 10 years if they break new quarantine rules. That's according to the UK's health minister. The government says people returning from COVID hotspots will have to pay more than $2,000 to cover the costs of quarantine in a hotel room for 10 days, plus transport and testing for coronavirus. Nicole Johnson reports.
Travelling into the UK has just become much harder. Not only will passengers have to take a PCR COVID-19 test before they board the flight, they will then have to take an extra 2 tests on day 2 and day 8 during their 10-day quarantine period and pay for all 3 tests.
And we'll be putting in place tough fines for people who don't comply. This includes a £1,000 penalty for any international arrival who fails to take a mandatory test, a £2,000 penalty to any international arrival who fails to take the second mandatory test, as well as automatically extending their quarantine period to 14 days.
Also from Monday, passengers who arrive from one of 33 countries where it's feared cases of the variant first identified in South Africa have spread will have to quarantine in a hotel, again at their own expense.
When they arrive, they'll be escorted to a designated hotel, which will be closed to guests who aren't quarantining for 10 days or for longer if they test positive for COVID-19 during their stay. We've contracted 16 hotels for an initial 4,600 rooms, and we will secure more as they are needed.
All these border restrictions are aimed at one thing: keeping the variant first identified in South Africa out of the UK. But it appears it's no more transmissible than the UK's dominant variant.
And because of that, there is no reason to think the South African variant will catch up or overtake our current virus in the next few months. And that's a really important point.
And as for a holiday abroad, you can forget that.
It is, of course, illegal to travel abroad without a legally permitted reason to do so, so it's illegal to travel abroad for holidays and other leisure purposes.
So right now there's no excuse for leaving the UK, unless, of course, it's for good. Nicole Johnston, CGTN, London.
The world's biggest holiday company, TUI, is pinning its hopes on a strong recovery this summer after being hammered by the pandemic. The travel giant is banking on successful vaccination campaigns after revealing that bookings are down 44% compared to last summer. Here's Juliet Mann. Juliet.
Thanks, Jamie. Well, as we saw in that report, official advice from the UK's Deputy Chief Medical Officer might be to hold off those escapes abroad for now. But TUI has reported a surge in bookings, just not as much as they'd hoped for, or enough to match pre-COVID times. The Germany-based firm revealed an $846 million loss during its first financial quarter. That's as lockdowns and travel restrictions in its key markets hit demand for flights. Compare that to a loss of $178 million for the same period the year before. Now, income in the 3 months to the end of 2020 was $566 million. Think that sounds good? Well, look at what it was, last time. $4.7 billion. That is a huge change. And turnover was well below the consensus estimate. But TUI said that cost-cutting limited the damage. 3 capital-raising exercises during the crisis so far, plus bailouts from the German government, have bumped up its cash fund back to $2.5 billion, and that's to get it through the months ahead. Now, bookings across the group have so far topped 2.8 million. That's for the European summer ahead, which is about half the levels seen in the summer gone by. TUI says it's hopeful that later in the year it will start to receive what it calls significant positive working capital inflow. I love a bit of corporate jargon, don't you? But what that means is more money coming in than it's spending. Average prices, though, they're going to be up 20% on the pre-COVID season of 2019. And all of that, of course, assumes that more of us are going to be able to take proposed holidays as scheduled. Because if there are additional restrictions, or if there's a need for vaccine passports, for example, between now and the summer, those numbers, they could all change. Well, let's talk to Paul Charles. He's CEO of travel consultancy, the PC Agency. Great to see you. Now, Paul, I have got flights booked for August to a red list country with the new pandemic hotel rules, with this triple test. It's going to cost me a fortune. How much have I got to consider paying now?
Well, the million-dollar question is whether you'll even be able to leave the UK to go to that red list country. The rules are very complex and have just been tightened even more by the government here. And essentially, yes, if you, let's say in August, are in the position that you are today, you obviously won't be able to take that holiday. You can't leave. It's illegal to travel unless it's for an essential reason. And this is what's creating a lot of the uncertainty that companies like TUI have been facing. The rules keep changing. The COVID virus is obviously leading to a lot of uncertainty, and it's causing governments to be very short-term in the way that they're approaching border control, who can leave and who can come back in. So much as we'd all love to be going on holiday and planning, it's proving quite difficult at the moment.
Is that the problem, though, man? If you think of TUI and the UK market as being crucial to their success, is it this lack of a sunset clause, for want of a better phrase?
Yes, there's not much sun around at the moment, but essentially the rules that have been updated today, which come in next Monday, will mean that should you be able to get away and then we're coming back into the UK, you would have to go through what I call a triple lock process. So essentially you would have to get a test, a negative test proof, up to 72 hours before you fly or take a ferry or get the Eurostar back to the UK. Then you'd have to fill in a passenger locator form, and that has to be accurate, otherwise you could face a prison sentence of up to 10 years, the government announced today. And then thirdly, you have to come back and quarantine. Now, you either have to quarantine for 10 days in a hotel from next Monday, or you have to quarantine for 10 days at home. But with both of those, you would also now have to take 2 tests on day 2 and day 8 of your quarantine. And just talking about this, you can see the complexity. It's tough enough for analysts like myself to follow, but let alone consumers who will have very little chance of following these rules.
Consumers, of course, who are going to have to pay with it. I know you think the government should stump up, but, you know, taxpayers paying for other people's holidays, not necessarily. So let's talk about these vaccine programmes then. Are they really going to give the sector the shot in the arm it needs?
Well, I'm really optimistic that the vaccine programmes are starting to work and will provide the certainty needed in future. Certainly infection rates and mortality rates appear to be coming down in the UK. The data is still initial, and we need to give it a couple of weeks to see what's going to happen. But I reckon by April time, the rates, not just in the UK, but in other parts of Europe, will be much lower on the back of the vaccine programmes working their magic. And if that does happen, and it's a big if, of course, but if it does happen, then we will see Europe itself opening up to more travel, I would say, certainly from the 1st of May. There may well be testing rules in place, still social distancing measures such as wearing masks, reducing numbers of people gathering, etc. But I think people will be able to travel. And that's what companies like TUI are banking on, that they won't have to refund passengers this year and they will be able to get them away on a holiday.
And that 2021 won't be a travel write-off. Paul Charles, always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much. Jamie, it looks like another staycation in Pembrokeshire for you.
Absolutely, absolutely. I love the rain. One of Spain's biggest industries is calling for more government help to save it from collapse. The hospitality sector has been one of the worst affected by the pandemic. Currently, food and drink venues have been forced to close in 10 of Spain's 17 regions. Tuesday saw demonstrations across the country by hospitality unions asking for more direct financial support from the government. Rahul Pathak reports.
It's make or break time for Spain's hospitality industry. Representatives of Madrid's hotels, bars, cafes and restaurants held a protest on Tuesday asking for more financial help from the Spanish government. Similar demonstrations were held all across the country.
We haven't received any direct help from the government. Even worse, they just don't listen to us. Their promises are weak and never fulfilled. Thousands and thousands of businesses in the hospitality industry are closing. We are losing too many workers that don't even qualify for furlough. They're now unemployed.
Across Spain, half of the region's establishments remain closed. Those that are allowed to open often have to close before evening time, killing the main part of their business. Basically, it's resulted in the hospitality industry lying in ruins. No one is immune to the financial fallout from the pandemic. Even Madrid's most famous restaurants have suffered huge losses. This is the Sobrino de Botín. First opened in 1725, it's officially the world's oldest restaurant, still in continuous operation.
We're having a bad time right now, as is most of the hospitality industry. I don't understand why they've put such tough restrictions in place for restaurants. I can't say we've never had an infection here, but I do believe they should focus more on other places where people gather socially.
Spain's hospitality sector, which employs around more than 360,000, has received some government help in the shape of the furlough scheme, rent reductions and tax cuts. However, places like Botín say more direct help is needed to help keep their businesses afloat. If not, expect to see more signs like these cropping up all over Spain. Rahul Pathak, CGTN, Madrid.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Trump on trial. The second impeachment of the former president is set to begin.
Patient after patient after patient. They take a long time to get better. They're the sickest patients we've ever seen.
It's a race against time because we can all see the threat that our NHS faces, the pressure it's under.
We're dealing with something we knew very little about.
Europe's first two epicentres in February have received their first dose of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine.
Another day, another grim milestone for the UK in its fight against COVID-19. 100,000 people have now lost their lives after contracting the virus.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
We can try out the wild and crazy ideas.
Nothing can stop an idea whose time is coming. This idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation. We should all be very basic when we're trying to save the world.
We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Our top stories: China and Central and Eastern European countries map out their economic relationship in a post-pandemic world.
The World Health Organization dismisses the possibility that coronavirus originated in a laboratory, saying animals are the likely source.
And huge fines and the threat of jail. The UK announces tougher border restrictions to curb the spread of new COVID variants.
Bitcoin has hit a new record high following Tesla's announcement that it's bought $1.5 billion of the cryptocurrency. After a 20% jump on Monday, it surged towards the $50,000 mark on Tuesday. The rally cooling after peaking at $48,216, almost enough to buy one of the best-selling Tesla vehicles. Elon Musk says he expects to start accepting the digital currency as payment in future. Let's talk to Matti Greenspan, who's the founder of Quantum Economics and the co-author of The Complete Guide to FinTech Trading and Investments. Thanks so much for being with us on the programme today. So what do you think is behind Tesla's decision to buy the cryptocurrency?
Yeah, thanks. Good to see you again, Robin. So this has been kind of a long time coming. We've seen more and more companies, so namely MicroStrategy and Square, adding Bitcoin to their balance sheets as a way to diversify their portfolio out of cash. Of course, the thinking is that there's been a lot of fiat money, a lot of money that's controlled by governments printed over the last year. And at some point, this money is going to go down in value. And of course, as we know, Bitcoin, due to its limited supply, is designed to go up in value over time. So this, of course, is a logical step for any company, and it's good to see Tesla leading the way yet again.
So what's been driving its huge price increase over the past year? Because it was rising before we had these comments from Elon Musk.
Yeah, so even just in the last few months, we've seen a huge realization from institutional players, and especially on Wall Street, who are suddenly realizing, just as we've been saying for many years, that fiat currency is designed to go down, whereas Bitcoin is designed to go up. So there's only 21 million Bitcoin that will ever be produced, and now it's a race to see who's going to own them.
So we hear a lot about the Bitcoin bubble, don't we? Given the price has risen so high now, is it a true reflection of the value, or is this bubble about to burst?
So that's an interesting question, Robin, because unlike the stock markets or bonds or commodities or any other asset we've seen in human history, there's less of a foundation of how to actually evaluate Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies. And the best we can really do to understand what the value should be is what the market is willing to pay for it. In March, during the pandemic, we saw, right as the pandemic hit last March, we saw all assets across the board take a huge hit. The stock market took tank, and Bitcoin went along with it. Bitcoin went under $4,000 per coin at the time. And since then, we've seen a huge rise in asset prices across the board, of course, the stock market, as well as Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, as people look to diversify themselves out of cash in order to improve their social standing. So from that $4,000, we've come up to about $40,000, almost $50,000 per coin today. So that's greater than 10 times the value in just under a year. But there really is the sky is the limit, because there isn't any kind of upward cap. I mean, we've heard, people predicting the price of Bitcoin, anywhere from $100,000, $400,000, $1 million within the next few years. So we really don't know where it's going to end up and what price levels it might touch in the middle.
So do you think Tesla buying in is something of a game changer for Bitcoin? Does this signify it might be becoming more mainstream?
Well, it's certainly good for Tesla, as we've been saying all along. I mean, it's been good for MicroStrategy and Square, the previous two companies. It is good for Bitcoin, as it gives it kind of a vote of confidence. It's going to make it a little bit more flexible in the eyes of global regulators and in the eyes of global corporations. The bigger question right now is, who is currently out there buying Bitcoin for their balance sheets and has not yet disclosed. And I think we've got a few guesses for those as well.
Okay, Matti Greenspan from Quantum Economics, good to talk to you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for having me.
Donald Trump's historic second impeachment trial on a charge of inciting last month's deadly storming of the U.S. Capitol is due to get underway in the coming hours. Let's talk to our correspondent, Jim Spellman. Jim, what are we expected to hear from the Senate?
Well, Jamie, as you may recall from a year ago, the Democrats from the U.S. House will essentially act as prosecutors, and the senators will act as the jury. But as opposed to last year or any other impeachment, all of these people are potential witnesses in this case, and the trial is happening in the actual location of this alleged offense. Today is going to be all about whether it is constitutional or not to impeach a president who is no longer in office versus a president who is currently in office. They're going to go over that for a few hours, and they'll have a vote, and it is expected to be approved, though remember, the Senate is split even 50-50, so it will be a close vote. That's a political out for many Republicans who don't want to cross President Trump. It allows them to vote for an acquittal without having to deal with the actual heart of the matter. Now, look, basically, this is a political exercise, not a legal exercise. And the Democrats know and have known all along that it's very unlikely that they will be able to flip the 17 Republicans necessary to convict former President Trump. But they do see this as a chance for truth and accountability. Here's Democrat Chuck Schumer, the majority leader in the Senate. Listen.
I believe the managers will present a very strong case. The evidence will be powerful. The evidence, some of it will be new. And I urge all my colleagues to pay careful attention to the evidence. I particularly urge my Republican colleagues, despite the pressure on them, to pay very real attention.
Jim, for those of us who are not U.S. constitutional and legal experts, procedurally, how is this trial expected now to unfold?
Well, they'll deal with this constitutional today. Then on Wednesday, they'll begin with the heart of the actual trial. Each side will have 2 days to make their case. We expect the Democrats to rely heavily on video of the rioters, and video of President Trump's statements. We expect President Trump's defense attorneys to argue that he did not incite this riot. It was just him using his First Amendment right to free speech, and that this was simply a political exercise. Then we're going to come to a key turning point. It's when Democrats will have to decide whether they want to call witnesses or not. Now, we know they've already asked President Trump if he would testify. He declined. If they decide to try to pursue calling witnesses, then this could stretch on for weeks, and we would expect Republicans to then also call witnesses. Everybody in that room is a potential witness, so if they decide to do that, it could get very ugly and very messy. At this point, it seems to be the thinking that Democrats will not do that, especially since they know that no matter what they do, a conviction is extremely unlikely. If they don't call witnesses, Jamie, this could be wrapped up early next week. That's what many Democrats, and certainly what President Joe Biden would like to see happen, get this done with so they can move on to other bigger legislative priorities.
Jim, no doubt we'll talk to you tomorrow. For the moment, Jim Spellman in the United States. Thank you very much.
Indeed.
There are reports from Myanmar that several people have been injured after police tried to disperse demonstrators with water cannon and rubber bullets in the capital. Crowds have also gathered in other towns and cities on a fourth consecutive day of protests. Catherine Drew reports.
Gathering in defiance. Crowds of protesters in the capital, Naypyidaw, came back onto the streets, defying a ban introduced by the military Monday on large public gatherings. When water cannon and tear gas didn't disperse the crowds, police fired warning shots into the air. There are reports several demonstrators have been injured. Protests have been ongoing in towns and cities, including in the main city of Yangon, where some protesters gathered according to their professions.
If the civil disobedience movement accelerates in the country as a whole, government machinery will stop. Not only the lawyers, I hope everyone will join the movement. We must not lose, nor is a draw acceptable. We must win. That's why we are on the street now.
Demonstrators are demanding the release of Aung San Suu Kyi and senior colleagues from her NLD party, who have not been seen since the military takeover on the 1st of February. Tensions had been building since the NLD overwhelmingly won November's general election, with enough seats to form a government. Without evidence, the military alleged voter fraud and called for a rerun. On Monday, General Min Aung Hlaing broke his silence over the takeover to announce new elections would be held, overseen by what he called a reformed election commission. Earlier, the military announced a year-long state of emergency. Arrests have been made in other cities, including in Mandalay, where 27 people were detained. Catherine Drew, CGTN.
Russia's foreign ministry says that Moscow views members of the jailed Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny's anti-corruption foundation as agents of influence acting on behalf of NATO. Tens of thousands of people have protested across the country in recent weeks against Navalny's imprisonment. The opposition politician is a prominent critic of President Vladimir Putin, who he accuses of mass corruption and attempting to murder him, which the Kremlin denies. Navalny's supporters are appealing for Russians to gather on Sunday and turn on their mobile phone torches to protest.
European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says the EU's foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, has her full support, despite more than 70 MEPs calling for his resignation following a visit to Moscow. Borrell is facing criticism for having stood by silently as his Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov, called the EU an unreliable partner during a joint press conference on Friday. It follows the expulsion of 3 Russian diplomats by Germany, Poland and Sweden, which was in retaliation for 3 EU diplomats being expelled by Moscow during Borrell's visit. They were alleged to have attended demonstrations in support of Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny.
In this case, the Russian reaction, both by the way how the visit was organized, by the way how the press conference was going, by the way what Mr. Lavrov was saying, by the way what the Russian authorities did against the European diplomats and against Mr. Navalny on the very same day, I think that offered very clear indication in which direction Russia wants to go. And this will now feed into the ongoing discussions among the member states, next one being on the FAC, during the FAC on the 22nd, and then among the leaders of the EU at the European Council in March, to see what consequences we will draw from this.
Talks to form a new government in Italy have entered their final day. The country's president has asked Mario Draghi, the former head of the European Central Bank, to find a majority in Parliament. The League Party has indicated it's ready to back him, and he's also received support from the former Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi. The Five Star Movement, the largest party in Italy's parliament, says it'll let its members decide in an online vote. The 24-hour window opens on Wednesday. Iran has launched a nationwide vaccination drive with an initial focus on frontline health workers. The first person to be vaccinated was the health minister's son, part of an effort by the government to boost public uptake in the programme. The country has ordered 2 million doses of Russia's Sputnik V vaccine and 4 million doses of the AstraZeneca shot, despite having announced a ban on UK-made vaccines. Indian police have arrested a man suspected of leading a group of protesting farmers who stormed Delhi's Red Fort last month. One person died and hundreds have been injured as demonstrators clashed with the police. The protests over agricultural reform have been going on for 2 months now. Farmers say new laws favour private buyers, but the government says there will be fixed prices for crops. Rescuers in India are trying to reach construction workers at a dam project in Uttarakhand state. Around 35 remain trapped inside a tunnel after the dam they were building was swept away on Sunday when a huge glacier broke apart. They're among 197 people still unaccounted for after water swept through villages. At least 28 bodies have now been recovered. Pollution from fossil fuel is responsible for 1 in 5 premature deaths. India, China, Europe and the United States are said to have a high share of the 8.7 million deaths attributed to burning coal, oil and gas. In 2017, the number of deaths from all outdoor airborne particle matter, including dust and wildfires, was estimated at 4.2 million. The research was a collaboration by 3 British universities and Harvard. The founding member of the Supremes, Mary Wilson, has died at the age of 76. Without saying the cause of death, her publicist says Wilson passed away suddenly at her home in the U.S. state of Nevada. Under the Motown Records label, the group, which included Diana Ross and Florence Ballard, scored 12 #1 hits with songs like Baby Love and Stop in the Name of Love.
In the last few moments, an Emirati Mars mission has successfully made it to the Red Planet. The UAE makes history as the 5th country and the first Arab nation to place a spaceship in orbit around Mars. The Hope spacecraft set off from Earth 7 months ago. It will study how energy moves through Mars's atmosphere. Let's talk now to Jim Stenman in Dubai. And Jim, the UAE will be breathing a sigh of relief about now.
Absolutely. This has been a $200 million project that's been years in the making, and one the country hopes will inspire the next generation to reach for the stars in what's been the first Arab mission to Mars. The Hope probe, which left Earth in July 2020 after several delays, entered its most critical phase early evening UAE time. This as the spacecraft successfully completed its orbit insertion, a highly complex mission with a 50% chance of success rate. So what happens next? Well, the Hope probe will circulate the second smallest planet in the solar system and send back critical data about its atmosphere. This mission is part of a much wider strategy around space exploration, which also include an ambitious national effort to develop local expertise in this area, after already having sent the first Emirati to space in 2019. It also has plans for a Mars settlement by 2117. The UAE and other nations, other Gulf nations that is, are working hard to diversify their economies away from petrodollars, which has become even more pressing because of weak oil demand during the ongoing coronavirus pandemic. The UAE's population of roughly 10 million people is heavily reliant on expat workers and lacks the scientific and industrial base of the big spacefaring nations, something that it hopes to change with this mission to Mars. The government launched a space center to oversee the project at a time when the UAE is investing heavily into building a knowledge-based economy here in the UAE.
And Jim, this isn't the only activity that's going on around Mars at the moment, is it? It's a very busy month for Mars.
That's right. Both the US and Beijing have their own space exploration missions to Mars this month, the latter of which could make China the first country to orbit, land, and deploy a rover in its inaugural mission to the Red Planet, which could really boost its space credentials. China previously made a Mars bid in 2011 with Russia, but the Russian spacecraft carrying the probe failed to exit Earth's orbit and disintegrated into the Pacific Ocean, rather.
Okay, Jim Stenman in Dubai, thanks very much.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, how homeless people in Beijing are coping during one of the coldest winters in years.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you. All around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. Israel is being held up as a shining example of implementing an efficient vaccination strategy. But in the neighbouring Palestinian territories, it's a very different story. Health authorities say they're working hard to secure enough doses for the sizable refugee community, but it is going to take time. CGTN's Stephanie Freed reports.
Mohammed has cerebral palsy. If he develops COVID-19, he's 3 times more likely to die than people without developmental disorders. That risk factor is why the refugee camp public school administrators where he lives told him last March to stop coming to school. Mohammed stayed home for 7 months. When the refugee camp development center administrator heard about him, he invited Mohammed to on-site classes to learn Arabic, math, grammar, motor skills, and English.
We believe that the disabled, they have the right to integrate inside the society and to have everything like anyone inside the camp.
If he and other kids like him get COVID-19 vaccines, they can reintegrate into public schools. But vaccines for the approximately 5 million Palestinians living in the West Bank and Gaza are a sticking point. Human rights advocates say the burden is on Israel as an occupying body to get vaccine doses to Palestinians, but Israel's government says a 1990s agreement between the two sides releases them from that responsibility.
Plans to vaccinate the Palestinian population are underway, but there's no solid strategy on the horizon.
The Palestinian Health Ministry has only secured enough doses to vaccinate 20% of the population.
We are badly in need for vaccination. Israel started and they have more than 25% of their population are vaccinated. And Jordan, they have started. But to reach to herd immunity, we need to have all the geographical area to be vaccinated.
The interdependence between the two sides and the critical need for a comprehensive vaccination campaign is clear when viewing scenes of Palestinian day laborers lining up at a military checkpoint to cross into Israel for work. Once the Palestinian refugees in Askar camp and beyond get inoculated, they'll be safeguarded against viral outbreaks, especially important in crowded living conditions. Stephanie Freed, CGTN, Askar refugee camp, Nablus.
As Beijing goes through one of the coldest winters this century, one group of people are having a particularly tough time, the city's homeless population. Nicole Nung reports on how they're coping and the impact this pandemic has had on them.
This is Zhang. He's been living on the streets for 26 years. What began as a way of trying to save money ended up being how he would spend nearly half his life. For those sleeping rough, Tai Piao says that wintertime is especially tough. But Tai Piao no longer lives on the streets. In January, he was able to move into a flat of his own with a little help. For 8 years, social workers at Hefeng have been getting to know those roaming the streets. The organisation says that since 2018, the number of homeless people in central Beijing has come down from as high as 3,000 to under 300.
Government aid stations will offer temporary help, between 7 to 10 days, like buying train tickets home. When people fall sick, they also take them to hospital for treatment.
Organisations like Hefeng see their role as filling in the gaps to these solutions.
Going from being homeless to being a normal resident in society is a big change. We see that homeless people sometimes lose their social skills, so we help them build a network. We give them physical and mental support.
They've helped hundreds turn their lives around. Often that starts with just a conversation. But the reasons behind homelessness are often so complex, it can take years before those turned out in the cold finally get off the streets. Of course, this winter has been difficult in another way. The virus has made public spaces a lot less accessible. I need to wear a mask almost everywhere I go. I need a phone to scan a code to enter buildings. And this has had a big impact on those sleeping in the streets. From nothing to a place he can now call home. Nicole Ng, CGTN.
Well, despite almost a year stuck at home for most people, the evidence is that the COVID-19 pandemic has caused a baby bust in Europe rather than a baby boom. Birth rates were down by a fifth in Italy last year, while the number of marriages was down by half. And 2020 was the first time in almost a decade where the German population stayed static. Should we worry about falling birth rates? More at europe.cgtn.com. And follow us on Facebook, Weibo, Instagram and Twitter.
And finally, a seed investor who's a mere seedling himself, 12-year-old Kwon Jun, persuaded his mother to open a trading account last year. He invested his life savings of more than $22,000, and his portfolio has since grown more than 40%. Kwon describes himself as a value investor and says his role model is the legendary Warren Buffett.
I started to earn money by selling toy cars when I was 7 years old. Since then, I have saved and made about $22,000 as seed money. For blue chips, I focused on companies like Samsung and bought it gradually as value investing and scored about 43% returns. I've made more than $13,000 so far.
The headlines again. China and Central and Eastern European countries map out their economic relationship in a post-pandemic world. Chinese President Xi Jinping has hosted leaders from 17 CEEC countries for a virtual gathering.
Our other headlines: a joint research mission between the World Health Organization and Chinese experts says it's extremely unlikely COVID-19 leaked from a laboratory.
Travellers could be fined more than $13,000 and go to jail for up to 10 years if they break new UK quarantine rules. The government says people returning from COVID hotspots will have to pay more than $2,000 to cover the costs of quarantine in a hotel room for 10 days, plus transport and testing.
And the United Arab Emirates makes history as its first mission to Mars enters the red planet's orbit. The Hope spacecraft set off from Earth 7 months ago.
Well, that's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you very much for watching.
More on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com and follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're available on smart TV apps such as Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV. You can also find us on YouTube and Dailymotion, as well as cgtn.com and the CGTN app.
From all of the team in London, it's goodbye.